For our 3 panels today, and the questions, again, you can put them on Eventora, so all the questions must be put there, and do not forget to get the feedback there as well. The first panel on forging a sustainable future. So for all of you that enjoyed this keynote, Miles will be on this panel, panel 1, and you can talk more and listen more about the sustainable future and how we can forge it. This panel will be moderated by Kelly Becker, MIT Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program, which I invite on stage together with the speakers. And this is panel 1, channel 1. So if you want to listen to this panel, please tune into channel 1.
All right, I hope that you're joining us on channel 1 for Forging a Sustainable Future. During this conversation, we're going to talk about this evolving marketplace and touch on some topics such as funding, cost competitiveness, research, and entrepreneurship. My name is Kelly Becker. I'm Assistant Director with MIT REAP. That's within Global Programs. It's the Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program. And for the last 10 years, we've worked with 70 regions around the world to accelerate their innovation-driven ecosystems. I'd like to now turn to my panelists and have them introduce themselves. Alizé, if I could start with you, please.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Alizé. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of SeedStars. We do impact investing in emerging markets, and we also support the startup and innovation ecosystems around the world. So we have programs right now running in the Philippines, or an incubation in Nigeria, or startup competition in Mexico. And here also for this panel, I also have the hat as I'm part of the Innovation Council of the Swiss Confederation. So sustainability being a very big topic for energy security. And finally, I'm also part of the investment committee of the Genesis Fund, which was launched by WWF, because when we talk sustainability, there's always the question of biodiversity. So investing also around conservation and biodiversity.
Hi everyone. Hi Kelly. My name is Oded. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Anti-Tau, the fusion energy company in Israel, focused on a compact fusion system to try to combat climate change, but also bring us what part of the sustainability issue is, to bring us abundant energy worldwide. And it's a small, compact system enabling actually to democratize energy, I believe, in a way that distributes the energy power generation in a better way. My background is electrical engineering as a young officer in the Navy, many years after 30 years of career, many years in the submarines, commanding the submarine force, later as head of naval operations in the Israeli Navy. And looking at national security in the eyes of global sustainability is, I think, a very interesting convergence. We did my master's at Harvard Kennedy School, looking at the global scale on what's happening. And you see the cross-section between national security and economics, and at the heart of that is energy. And so a lot of what we're discussing this couple of days here is really trying to solve these big problems. And once I retired, I said, okay, the next chapter is energy. And in energy, it's fusion, and in fusion, we got to solve it quickly. And that's what we're working on.
Excellent. Anu?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Pleasure to be a part of this panel. I'm Anu Anaswamy. I'm in the Mechanical Engineering Department at MIT. Our lab basically looks at automation and decision-making in real time, and we are very much involved in the space of renewable energy integration. And like Oded said, it's all about sustainability, and climate change is about as big a societal scale challenge as we face, and it's the most urgent one, and we are very much interested in figuring out how we can use, emergent technologies and get that electron down to the end user in the most reliable and resilient way. So looking forward to more conversations about that.
And our recent keynote, Miles, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Miles Barr. I'm co-founder and chief technology officer at Ubiquitous Energy. At Ubiquitous Energy, we're making transparent solar technology that we're deploying first in architectural glass. So think of for building windows. I'm an MIT alum. I have a PhD in chemical engineering. So I started out as a technologist and now have kind of become an entrepreneur. Yeah, looking forward to discussing with you all.
We're the lucky panel with the keynote.
Yes, yes. So I want to encourage you, if you're on channel 1 with us, to submit your questions. I'll be checking them as we go through our conversation here. And those were wonderful introductions, but I'd love to give you all a chance to elaborate on on your background and when was a key moment that you wanted to focus on sustainability? This question is for any of you.
I guess for us, 10 years ago when we launched SeedStars, actually sustainability at that time was more related to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So it wasn't, kind of got hijacked by climate change and environmental, kind of more energy-driven questions, but it also involved social inclusion. So it was reflecting on how would we build more purpose-driven businesses and support these businesses, environmental being one of the elements. Whereas now sustainability, especially in the private sector, is very much around climate change and the energy question. So I came in from that perspective of the Sustainable Development Goals. And then quickly, as I was supporting the Swiss government and also the different funds that SeedStars is a part of, the more we had customer awareness, the more we had regulatory actions taken towards renewable energy, the more it was absolutely a necessity for us to get into that space of because it is the more pressing issue today. So that's where I come from 10 years ago when it related to sustainability.
I think for me, some 7 years ago when I did retire finally, and I said, okay, the main problems in the world are around food, maybe habitable land, issues they're all sustainability, but as my analysis went, at the core is energy. And maybe as a commanding officer of a submarine that has a personal relationship to each electron that they have in the batteries, sometimes it's life and death, you really, really appreciate what energy means. And I think eventually looking on issues of global security, at the heart of many of the problems in the world, energy exists. And that's a place where I think global security all the way into self-security and human security when you have abundant energy and distributed and democratized, and that's a solution that needs to be there and as the base for other sustainable things that we need to solve. There are other things that need to be also dealt with once we have that. So it's amazing. It's super exciting. It's super important this decade.
For me, I guess it was more serendipity. I mean, way back, my degree is electrical engineering in power. But I had moved away from that to optimization and control because, that's where I found that it's not just that you understand the universe, but this is how you can change the universe. So in some sense, 10 years ago, when I was looking to change fields, I had this opportunity to have a sabbatical with, and the students who came to work with me had a background in electricity, and there was an opportunity there to really rethink the whole way in which the paradigm of our power systems is to be architected. And so it seemed like the right way to bring in all the expertise on decision-making and complex systems towards this problem of where you need to really perhaps re-architect the grid in order to integrate solar and wind power. And how do you do that efficiently? It seemed to be a fantastic opportunity. And, and it coincided with the fact that this was one of the top challenges that the world faces. And it was, all the stars were aligned in that direction. And here I am.
I think for me, it was a little bit more of happenstance as well. When I was a kid, I loved just building things, and I think that I still love building things, kind of in whether it's a technology or a process or an organization or things like that. I always loved science and technology when I was a child, and that kind of just is where I ended up excelling through my kind of education. That brought me to MIT. I was fortunate to work in a lab that just happened to be working on a solar project. And I think that solar to me is this magic technology. It seems impossible. It's you're creating electricity from almost nothing. And I think that's what initially just got me excited, this sort of magic of it. And then just got to work building and seeing what came out of it. It happens that that's been in sustainability, which there's a huge impact potential, and that's all a motivator now. But that I wouldn't say is what got me into it to start. It was a little bit more of a, I got here and I like where I landed.
Very nice. It's a great palpable energy, your sort of origin story and how you got into this space. I'd love to start to focus on a specific area, and one topic is how the marketplace has changed from where it was a decade ago. So looking back, how has it changed? And maybe I could start with Oded on this question.
It's interesting. I think there is an understanding, first of all, in the public, and after that with investors. And therefore, we see more and more private money and investors going into sustainability, and not only governments that had the responsibility, I would say, to solve some of these issues, or maybe not create them in the first place. But in a sense, now we see a very big change in the way we see the shift of money and resources from private sector going into sustainability in all aspects of sustainability, I think. And that's a beautiful thing happening. And I think people are taking responsibility now. So that's a big change, and it is a big enabler to really solve some of these big issues. So we see in fusion, for example, in the last decade, or in the last just 5 years, $5 billion have been going to private sector, and not only to the big national facilities or the big experimental facilities. So we see that pushing ahead technology that will eventually enable us to solve some of these big problems. And I think it's happening in other places as well. You see it in food, you see it in other areas. So I think it's an important change, and it's a fundamental change in a sense.
So if I could add to that, technology is most certainly an enabler, and some of the crucial components in the context of, say, for instance, electricity generation, utility scale solar, the cost has gone down enormously. Storage, the cost has gone down enormously. It's much more cost effective for us to think in terms of batteries of different scales. And the whole paradigm of transportation, electrification of everything, has again been a fantastic opportunity for all of these kinds of sustainability considerations to really move forward in an exponential way.
I think the one thing I'd add is we're seeing that end users are actually demanding sustainable solutions now, which I think is, I think newer generations are putting a priority on consuming, in a sustainable way. We see that in the built environment. So, like multifamily housing developments actually advertise their, we have rooftop solar is actually like a selling point when they're trying to attract tenants, which I don't think we were seeing that 10 years ago. And it's driving then, investment from, the companies that supply materials or products into those, consumer bases, and then therefore investment into the technologies that support kind of sustainable products.
These sound all like positive changes to me through the last decade. As an investor, I'd love to get your take on what you see for the next 10 years in this space.
Well, I think we're just going to see an acceleration of the trends that have taken place the past 10 years, because we were heavily focused only on renewable energies, and now it's taking up a whole larger ecosystem because it's proliferated in every industry. Right. Transportation, housing, new materials. So that is just going to continue. I actually asked ChatGPT what was the thought on kind of the future trends, and it goes, to the larger concept of course, renewable energy and energy efficiency, but then everything related to circular economy, which I think is going to be huge. And in circular economy, we do have to add biodiversity, so the augmentation of biodiversity, but also its conservation. We also see it more and more through social impact, because you have to understand that most of the world will not be able to have the same infrastructure that we're talking about in more mature markets. So what does the future energy look like for them, and how do you build the appropriate technologies which don't necessarily have highly sophisticated infrastructures?
Andrew, you touched on cost a little bit already. Can you talk to us more about what that will become for sustainability? Will it always be competitive on cost, or do you think it will become secondary as we look towards the future?
That's a tough question to answer. it's hard to pinpoint to specific reasons that are causes that would impact on that. I mean, one of the things that really is in the context of electricity grid is that there are multiple stakeholders that are entering the picture. If you ask in some circles, they'll say that the technology for generating and delivering electricity using 100% renewables is already here. It's a question of deployment. It's a question of implementation, which means that we're really talking about those with boots on the ground getting involved in the story, regulators, policymakers, economists, who basically can have these kinds of technologies implemented. Because with wind and solar, we are indeed changing the way in which electricity is delivered. I mean, you can't change the laws of physics. Electricity will travel still at the speed of light, but you're not talking about these large synchronous generators situated far away from the centers of population and transmission lines and so on. A lot of it might be happening at the grid edge with all kinds of solar technologies and wind and batteries. You might have a totally different way. Every one of the smart buildings can be basically a generation hub. In which case, the way in which electricity is delivered, how it is monitored, metered, billed, implemented, and all of those things enter the picture. How do you deliver it in an equitable way? Right. There's another question here, right? That all of the costs of technologies are borne by those who have in less affordable communities, and they're the ones who have to subsidize the costs of those with people with solar rooftops. So those kinds of inequities should be addressed. So the conversation gets a lot more complicated, and so where the points, the pinch points are things that need to be looked at with a different lens. And I think those are the challenges that we have to address as we go forward.
Absolutely.
I can add to that maybe. I think in many technologies and many markets, what you see that regulation coming in actually creates a change in what does it mean. Does the cost is more important than the value of what you're putting into the market. And in certain areas, it may cost more, but it's more important to have it. And regulators will go for it and will decide that that's now the
benchmark.
Must, and that's the benchmark, exactly. So I think we will see some of that happening, and not only wait, and we shouldn't be only waiting for the market to say it's to tell us what it needs, but also to lead. I think leadership is inherently super important in order to really tackle climate change and to really solve sustainability issues. And leadership means using those kind of capabilities of regulation and other things. So I think it's a combination that has to come into play in order to really make this work. So I'm looking forward to seeing Miles, windows as part of regulation.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that for new technology, the cost when that technology is in its nascent stage is going to be high. And so scale is required to get the cost of a new technology to the point where it can be competitive. And so how you get technologies from that nascent stage to the scaled stage, I think is where incentives and subsidies and things can help to kind of accelerate adoption. So new technology and the companies working on new technologies can get to the scale where it can sustain itself on a cost basis.
That's a great jumping off point for the next question. For entrepreneurs, thinking about maybe getting into this space, do you all see an incremental innovation being successive, or do you think it needs to be more radical?
I mean, fusion,
both is good.
What does it mean? I think incremental is what we've seen in solar for decades now, and I think it brought great benefit and value. But I think that what we'll see, and hopefully we will see in the near future, this decade, is a jump. And that's fusion energy, I believe, will come into play. And on the energy side, we'll see a big change, I think, in this decade. And that will change the picture. because you have abundant resources, abundant source of energy, and not many people know, but using hydrogen chemically gives you a certain amount, but using hydrogen for fusion gives you 1,000,000 times more energy. The power density of that, because it's nuclear power, it's a lot more energy. And so when you think sustainability, you want the least amount of resources to get the most amount of energy that you have. So I'm looking forward for a big jump, and I'm working hard to make it.
See, the other thing is also that different parts of the world will require different portfolio when it comes to energy. I mean, you had this fantastic picture of this bloated figure of energy consumption. Similarly, there's also a very distorted view when it comes to the kind of energy mix that you have in different parts of the world. So that will also then, I think, determine which technologies will be embraced faster than which ones. And so that in turn will dictate whether the advances are incremental or exponential. So even, for instance, if you take the United States, the physical geography is so wildly different from the Northeast to the Northwest to the Southwest. And so depending upon that, then I think the energy mix might be entire. For instance, nothing needs to be changed in perhaps Vermont or Canada because there's so much hydro. And already it's renewables, right? Whereas in places like California, you really want to be able to embrace solar in a big way. So that in turn will also, I think, dictate as to how progressive one is in terms of adopting new technologies. And so the market for Miles's transparent solar would be fantastic in places like that. So I think that's also something that one thing for sure is that things are going to change the way we, I think, generate and consume electricity and energy. But what exactly is a specific solution, I think, will vary a lot from place to place.
And we see it in frontier markets, like really looking at sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia. I feel like sometimes when I speak to European entrepreneurs, there's this kind of disappointment they were expecting of this level of sophistication when thinking of having to be innovative at scale. Because again, scale is kind of the ingredient you want to have. But it's got to be simple enough to the infrastructure that is existing and to the consumer and to their capabilities of being able to produce and consume this type of electricity. So sometimes it's really frugal innovation that will stick for a while. And it still is, in most cases, much cleaner energy than before. And you have to imagine in many markets, when we talk energy, we talk about kerosene. Okay, so we're so far from anything that we could imagine. And so that leapfrog to these kind of decentralized microgrid solutions with a solar panel, et cetera, is a great first step so that you can build equity when talking about energy, which is so fundamental because energy means light at night, which means lowering criminality rate, which means better education. It just has a catalyst effect on so many of the primary needs and social, social concept of what a collective community should look like.
Sorry, Anu, you talked about this a little bit, sort of in knowing the market as a piece of it, but in thinking about our students in the audience, what role can research and entrepreneurship play in accelerating sustainability?
Oh, big, huge. I mean, I'd really like to jump off on Alice's point about equity. And I don't think we pay enough emphasis on it as we should. And that's really for the younger generation to really jump on and run with in a big way. There's a fantastic initiative that I was involved in, we were talking about it earlier, called Empower a Billion Lives. And that speaks to exactly the kinds of things that Alice was mentioning. 30% of the world has energy poverty. And so when you in places like that, let's do more than having 1 million users get onto ChatGPT in 5 days. Let's move that towards 1 billion people in the world getting energy access, even if it is, for instance, for 3 hours of a light bulb or a place where they can charge their cell phones or use a way of powering their water pumps for irrigation. All of those things will jumpstart their economy in a huge way. And thinking in those directions, and what are the technologies, because you need to perhaps think in a totally different mindset instead of an infinite grid. These are these microgrids that will perhaps be the way to go, so that you can provide electricity for remote parts of the country where there is no electricity whatsoever right now. And those required totally thinking outside the box type of solutions. And the technologies are there in terms of mixing and matching and having a few solar pumps or biomass-based generation or what have you. So those are all, I think, things that research and entrepreneurship are really going to pave the way towards.
Oh, definitely. I don't see any advances in technology and jumps in technology being created without new minds trying to solve these problems and enjoying it. And students here, and I assure him, and MIT, when I went and I saw it, I mean, it's a fantastic ecosystem in which you thrive in those areas, and then ideas come. And I think it's super important that every person here needs to focus on this.
Students can bring their fresh perspective to this problem to solve.
You have to have it.
Again, if you're joining us on Channel 1, please share your questions. I'm going to get to one of these questions now. Thinking about sort of the inequities in the world, how do you all see the impact of the current war in Ukraine now impacting the progress of sustainability? Tough question.
Well, it starts easy. It's a big impact.
Yeah.
And any war creates an impact. And this war created a large impact on energy. It began with a problem with energy. Other than the suffering of the people and other than the war itself, which is a lose-lose situation. But when you look at what happened and think a decade before, you see that Europe made a change. And some of the European countries, like Germany, for example, decided to reduce nuclear power. Mm-hmm. And reducing nuclear power reduced the capability to have more of something else, and super dependent on one path of gas. So you get to a point where you need multiple options for energy, for example. But I think it's also pushed, I think, the decision makers to find other solutions. And that's also created a movement of energy distribution and what have you with that. So it's impactful. We'll have to wait and see where it gets us.
Yeah, I think it was well said, and it's really the understanding that there was a failure in terms of energy security in many nations, and looking back of how it was dealt. But at the same time, hopefully, I think what also breathes through these political decisions is that a kind of defensive, isolated approach will not be a victory, because there needs a portfolio approach. There needs to be some level of collaboration and engagement. So I hope that is kind of the ultimate outcome of it, and the opportunity has accelerated the understanding of its importance at a national and international level. I hope, and it has proven that it has accelerated funding and hopefully regulation, because it makes a big difference when we want to scale effectively.
Yeah, that's the thing they say, right? The 3 Ds, diversification, decentralization, and digitization. Yeah. So I think all of those are really underscored by this global security issues.
Yeah.
Thinking about the last D, digitization, one of our audience questions is asking the panel, do you see AI or quantum computing making a big breakthrough in the next years of redefining what we call a sustainable future?
No question, no question. I mean, the more information we can gather and the more reliably we can distribute that information, the more efficient and the more reliable and the more resilient the electricity grid will become. It's already happening. It goes under the moniker of smart grid, cyber, physical energy grid. So there is also a big push towards democratization of the grid. And so if you have lots and lots of solar owners, for instance, and they're all not necessarily going to be owned by utilities. They might be privately owned, in which case you want to exchange that information about availability of electrons. And these may be at various points in time or various points in space and location. And you need the information layer to interconnect. And so AI with those kinds of decision-making then greatly enable the delivery of electrons to the end user. So absolutely, I think there's a big role for AI to play, along with other instrumentation technologies.
Of course.
I'm really excited about how AI can actually accelerate technology development. An example from what we're working on, a big part of our engineering challenge is the material design or the molecular design. If you think about how a molecule is made, there's kind of infinite possibilities of ways to arrange atoms. And we actually use AI to help guide us on what next molecules to try by training the AI on pretty much every material we've ever made and has been made in this field. And AI and machine learning is able to kind of make non-intuitive inferences between, materials that may not look like they should work, but give us a hint that maybe this is worth spending kind of laboratory, human resources to try to make and test. And it's actually really accelerated our success rate in testing and trying new materials. And there's ways that you can apply kind of the same principles to all different types of technology development to kind of speed in the time from idea to kind of minimum viable product by incorporating kind of these new AI technologies in the development process. And there are a lot of advances in that area.
Exciting.
I think not only advances, I think in AI, but I totally agree with AI, what has been said. I think also the capability and strength of computing strength. For fusion, supercomputers are used in order to run some of these simulations. And there's never, and there still doesn't exist, one simulation that can really simulate everything. The magnetic fields with the particles, with the magnetohydrodynamics, and with everything together to really give you a solution. So you really need to test it quickly. And I think the strength and capabilities of today's systems enable much, much better simulations and accelerate everything that is being done in research and in science. And I think AI has part of that, obviously, very strongly. I don't think we really understand how much AI we already have around us all the time. And it seems that we can't do without it.
At least that was our highlight for the first day. That's one of my takeaways. Another audience question we have, we've talked about how there are different stakeholders involved, especially in the funding of sustainability, and we've briefly touched on the role of government. So this question is, how can the government support and embrace sustainability? And I'm thinking maybe moving forward in the future, because you all have touched on sort of its role in the past and currently.
I think in Israel there's a very strong combination of what the government does in order to accelerate what's called startup nation and to really push forward on high end and deep tech and other things. And together with us, NTTA, with the Ministry of Energy and some of the leading universities and the nuclear center in Yavne, we created a fusion institute just recently within Israel to create an ecosystem. So that's a Ministry of Energy pushing forward and creating some, facilitating the ability to really push a specific area. A couple of years ago, there was opened a quantum center, or quantum computing center in the south city of Beersheba as a center for that, for example. And that was done by the government. So governments have a role in that, very strong role, when they see something looking further into the future where private money doesn't want to go yet. But I think what it says, okay, it shows a direction, and then private money joins. And I think that's the way I see it, and I think it works very well within Israel, and I think within other ecosystems as well. You see the DOE in the US doing the same right now in fusion, as well as in small modular reactors and other solutions for energy. And I think it's the right approach.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. In the U.S., certainly Department of Energy, National Science Foundation are sort of big supporters and funding resources. But I think I'd also like to add that the formula might be quite different between developed countries and developing countries. I think in many of the places, I mentioned the Empower a Billion Lives initiative. The government is simply unable to provide electricity to the whole country's population, in which case they do look for outside funding, entrepreneurs perhaps, philanthropists perhaps, different various kinds of foundations, because they simply do not have the means, in which case they really look for alternate solutions, additional complementary solutions. So I think there's a lot of possibilities, and there should be that diversification in funding as well. So we just need to remember that, again, there's no one formula that is perhaps appropriate for everyone.
That's true.
Excellent point. One of our audience questions is asking, and I always like this type of question, was there a particular challenge in your career that you faced so far that you took on, you overcome, and has just energized you to move forward in this space? Any story you want to tell about a challenge?
I can start.
Which one to choose from?
But
well, you're still here. You're still here in the space, so we know the outcome is good.
The one related to what we're doing here, I guess. When I did retire, I didn't know what I'm gonna start exactly. It wasn't fusion. It was sustainability. It has many options, and then I decided, energy is the main thing. And in energy, I said, it's fusion, but I didn't have ideas at the time. I had some notion. There were some courses in MIT that were being done on some stuff. I downloaded them. I started working on them, thinking when I was young, reading about many things, but really where do I start? And it's usually only if many eyebrows were, looked at me. People were looking, you crazy going for fusion? It's $1 billion and it's almost impossible, always 30 years away. And I said, well, if it's something so important that international community is putting $30 billion for the last 30 years to try and solve it and hasn't been able to solve it, it means, first of all, humanity believes it's important. Mm-hmm. It's a solution. Now let's see how we can push forward. And I said, let's push forward. And really to assemble the team was the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge, where do I get the ideas? Who's the team? I found brilliant scientists, a couple of brilliant physicists to think about some of their ideas. They had, one of them, he was sitting on an idea for 20 years and didn't really discuss it because he said only crazy people start fusion. And then the only way to start is when you have a big exit from his other startups. Mm. So I said, no, we're starting now, we have to, and we're moving forward. And that was a big challenge to start with nothing, but with a good idea. But when you are in your place where you, and that's for the young people who think of starting something, and I wasn't doing it young, but I'm young in this. If you're on the right path and you are passionate about it, things will fall into place. Yeah. And that's what happened. It's like magic happening. And it's really fantastic when it starts. And so finding the team and then starting to push forward, that was super challenging in the beginning. But it's only becoming more challenging when you continue.
The more you know, the more.
It's funny,
but
it's great. Yeah, you're looking back, the challenges that seemed so life or death at the time, and they were, seem so small now. Yeah. It's the solution
obvious
presented itself, and it was obvious now. And I think as an entrepreneur, if you talk to most successful startups that have made it all the way. There were at least one time where they were looking death in the face and got through it. Yeah. Probably more than once. And it's hard to imagine how that actually feels when you're there. Whether it's funding or that it's your customers about to pull their contract or whatever the case is. It's just hard to imagine it until you're there. And I think you have to be ready to persevere when that happens. Because if you don't have that motivation and kind of some sort of North Star that you're okay, this is why I'm doing this, it's gonna be really hard to get through that because it is painful when it happens. Yeah. But then once you're through it, you look back and it seems so small and, but it kind of those sort of battle wounds kind of make you who you are once you're at the other side of it.
Maybe I will add to that just that the team is super important at that time.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember my co-founders when we were setting up the core team. They had already built several businesses, and I really wanted to get the best CV, the smartest person in this area, best connections, whatever. And they kept bringing me back and saying, it's the worst way to choose your core team. Focus on the values, because it's so rough, the journey. The only thing that's going to allow you to stick when the highs come about, which are as absurd as the lows, it's going to be values. And it's true, 10 years later, we're the same founding team and core team, and that's the only thing that makes sense out of the insane pain that you live through. But I think for me, that what probably took me 10 years, so until now, what I'm still trying to learn is it really is a marathon. And you can look back and see the progress, but in present now, you're so far. And this constant feeling of, I'm so far away, even though you know your building blocks, but because the North Star metric is ambitious and it's so disruptive, that sense of marathon is for me the toughest to cope with. Just like, because there's nothing, there's no quick fix, there's no hockey stick. Those are just the nice graphics. But it doesn't feel at all like that in the day-to-day.
So I'd only say two things. I've realized over the years that every challenge is an opportunity. Every challenge is an opportunity. And so, at that time, it seems like the most insurmountable thing. But then when you look back at it, okay, so that's what it was. But, for every low, there is a high that's coming. And that's the way to really look at it. And the second thing I would say is, I've realized that the best way to deal with these kinds of high-intensity situations is to pull back and be a witness to your own life. And when you do that, it makes it less personal and less immediate and more handleable.
True. Now I have to sleep on it. Oh, it's my thing. Even if it feels like it's urgent, the decision has to be taken the minute. The next morning, I'm never the same person with that same decision. So it's become my rule.
I love these. I feel like the takeaways are like your team is so important, and to also just take a step back, get some perspective on the situation, no matter the urgency that you're being nudged towards. I think we have time for at least one more audience question. This one is, what is the biggest problems that need to be solved in order for the solar panels to become the #1 power source? Or I would maybe broaden that and say for solar energy to become the #1 power source.
I don't think there will be #1 power source. We have to have a portfolio. I think that's my starting point, at least. I think there are places where solar makes sense. There's places where other types of technologies make sense. I think in all cases, it just has to be scalable, has to be deployable. It has to compete on cost, because you're competing against every other form of energy. So, those are kind of the basic building blocks. But I think thinking of the portfolio is the way I would encourage people to think of it. I'm obviously very excited about solar technology. That's what I'm working on, but I don't think it's going to be the only power source to power the world. So,
well, we live in our planetary system, so the Earth does go around the sun. So the sun does not shine all the time. So yes, you have to have a portfolio. But I think, the kinds of things that you're working on, and what I think has probably happened over the last couple of decades, is that the efficiencies have increased enormously. So economies of scale, therefore, are really working out in the favor. So the question is how best you can get the most out of the sun and appropriately complement it with other technologies so that you can deliver electricity when it's needed is the thing.
I actually think it will be. We're bringing a small sun into existence.
Yeah, exactly. Solar energy in a...
Well said.
In a container-sized system.
I feel like we've given some great advice to some of the entrepreneurs, but again, going back to sort of a student focus before we close, what would you encourage students to do throughout their studies to set them up for a career in sustainability?
During their studies?
Yes.
Figure out what you are good at and what are your biggest strengths, and really polish them, hone them as well as you can, and put that into motion. I think that's what I mean. So everybody is different. Good that everybody is different. So, but figuring out what you are good at and figuring out also what you're not good at. So you build a team that Oded mentioned. That's very important. But then figure out how you can become the best version of yourself using the environment around you. That's what I would say.
I think the hard skills, whether they be engineering or product management or entrepreneurship or sales, I think those are transferable across industries. I mean, within sustainability, I mean, obviously you'll want to learn the terminology and the language and understand what the market looks like. But I think those hard skills are kind of what, at least hard and soft skills, but the more transferable skills I think are super important. I feel like I would be equipped to start a non-solar technology company with the experience I have, from this venture, because all those skills can be really used anywhere. So I think it's about following your passion, find an area that really excites you. It doesn't excite you, doesn't keep you up in the morning or keep you up at night and wake you up in the morning. It's going to be hard to go the distance with it. So I think just finding something that you're passionate about is probably the most important.
I think I totally agree with Anu and Miles about the passion and push forward with that. I would add to that, the first day in the Navy, they put you with your gear, run around the field in 30 seconds. It looks impossible, you actually don't succeed. And then they tell you again, and you don't succeed, and again, and again. Then at the end of the day, you succeed. And something looked impossible, suddenly is possible. The next day, they give you a new challenge, and it definitely is impossible. Can't do it. Because it's a team run, and everybody with all the gear and everything, and run around, no way you can do it. And at the end of that day, you also succeed. So what changed wasn't your capability, it was your perspective. And the ability to work with and hone all your skills that you will create to really bring it all together to do the impossible that was in your mind impossible. So what I would say is definitely look at everything that other people are saying impossible and challenge those things as a first thing to go for. And that you push the boundaries and don't stay within the same thing that you know. Push the boundaries. Everything impossible probably is, except for going faster than the speed of light. Almost anything else is possible.
I say the same thing, and I'm frustrated because I can't say it in a more eloquent way. But it all comes down to do something. I mean, if anything, start doing something. That matters to you, and it's very personal, and you understand that better through the experience of doing things. And so it's do something that matters with cool people. And what I mean by cool people is who are the people that you want to surround yourself with? Because I truly believe you are the sum of those people. So, and it's done with experience, and studies is a great opportunity to just start doing these things that you think matter to you with the people you find cool. And that's kind of been my motto in life. But it's not eloquence.
Can I say one other thing for 30 seconds?
Of course.
I think don't ever stagnate.
Yes.
Try to do at least one thing, say maybe for an hour, a week or something, that scares the daylights out of you. Really. So that's one way you can make sure that you're not, settling down into a routine. So if you do that, then I think you'll be okay.
But don't go all the way to jumping without a parachute from an airplane. But something else.
Something, yeah.
If that's what needs.
No, I mean, I truly feel like academia is a safe space to do that. It's a safe space to experiment, to try new things, to meet new people, to fail. I think it's a great place to fail. So I really hope our students took all this advice to heart. So I feel like we've given some advice to students, to entrepreneurs, but, if there's any closing thoughts you have about forging a sustainable future, what would be someone's like main soundbite to take away from this conversation, or your top priorities from your perspective?
I always feel kind of inspired. I have the quote of Margaret Mead, which says, "Never doubt that a small group of committed and engaged citizens can change the world, because indeed it is the only thing that ever has." And it really comes down to people believing that they can do the impossible. So for me, that it holds true everywhere, but it holds true for the future of a sustainable future on this planet.
Maybe a small tip, but I think some of the people don't understand that what they comes easily to them is where they're best and where they vibrate the best and where they will probably be most successful. And sometimes you just need to find that area where you are your best and follow that with the passion and connecting it to sustainability. I think it's a super important cause, and you need to do that. That's the area which will be the most impactful in the next decade. So that's the place to go to right now.
I'm very optimistic. I just look at this crowd here, and I think most of you are listening to panel one, right? and there are so many that I see that are like young generation, and that makes me optimistic that you're all dedicated to this cause, and it's your world that you have to protect even more so than say mine. And you are seriously thinking about it, and so I'm very optimistic that the world is in very good hands.
I'm also optimistic. Yeah, I'll say that there are so many opportunities for impact. Find an area that you're passionate about and go for it. Figure out how to build something to address that.
Wonderful. Well, it's been a great conversation with this panel. I want to thank you so much for sharing all your experiences with us and your advice. It was a great conversation.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.